It's time for an inside look at what's cooking on the San Diego Padres hot stove as the team gets ready for the 2025 season.
Swing and a miss. Padres win.
Sam Levitt breaks down the Padres offseason moves and provides an in-depth look at everything you need to know before the Padres take the field for spring training.
Swinging a high fly ball. Deep left center. This one way back and gone.
Plus the latest headlines from around Major League Baseball and analysis of what's happening around the big leagues.
Breaking news out of baseball.
Welcome to Inside San Diego Baseball with the Padres Radio Network's pre- and post-game host, Sam Levitt.
We are live on a Wednesday night in America's finest city. Sam Levitt with you inside San Diego Baseball on 97.3 The Fan. Great to have you with us on this Wednesday evening. I am not in the studio tonight. I am in New York, all the way 3,000 miles away. Here at I would call this house now, my parents' house on Long Island, the East Coast 97.3 The Fan studios. I am back here one final time this offseason, so that's where I'm broadcasting from tonight. So good to be with you. It is 10 p.m. here on the East Coast, so it's a late night edition for me of Inside San Diego Baseball. But for you back in San Diego, it is the usual 7 to 9 p.m. as we talk all things Padres baseball and beyond as we continue to inch closer and closer to spring training. And I feel like I've said that for a couple of months now as we got through the winter meetings, as we got to New Year's, as we've moved through the month of January. But now we are getting really close. I mean, really, really close to Peoria, to spring training. I'll get to all that in just a moment. We've got Frank Marchese tonight back in the studio in San Diego, holding things down, getting us on the air. Frank will chime in, of course, from time to time on the program. Frank, how are you?
Doing good, Sam. Doing good. Had a pretty much anything but sports conversation over the last hour, so ready to get back to it now.
Yeah, well, we'll talk a little bit more baseball. I know the final 30, 40 minutes of the Scraby Chronicles was all over the place. I don't know that we're going to talk about Beaver Nuggets or the 9-9-9 challenge, 9 hot dogs, 9 beers, 9 innings, but we will keep you entertained for the next couple of hours. And we'll get into a lot over the course of the next 2 hours. We'll talk about some of the rumors that continue to swirl around Michael King, about Dylan Cease. We'll talk about the Padres bringing back Elias Diaz on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. Really, if you want to just be frank about it, the most significant signing the Padres have made to this point in the offseason, and really a significant signing, I think, for a couple of reasons, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Some of the minor moves the Padres have made in the last week or so. To be honest with you, we have not been on the air, at least on this show on Wednesday nights in a couple of weeks. So really a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks, including Roki Sasaki officially signing with the Dodgers, including Jurickson Profar going to Atlanta earlier today, Ha-Sung Kim going to the Tampa Bay Rays. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So a lot has happened as, again, we inch closer and closer to spring training, and it's hard to believe that I am under 2 weeks away from heading to Peoria, 2 weeks from yesterday. So I'll be en route through Alpine, through the mountains, down back into the desert, through Yuma, and get to the Phoenix area in under 2 weeks. And pitchers and catchers report, in fact, 2 weeks from today. So that is exciting, a little bit scary to know that we're that close to spring training, that close to baseball. And I don't even mean scary because there are still, a ton of question marks surrounding the Padres and the roster. But to be honest with you, just for me, the minute I get to spring training, the minute I get to Peoria, it's a totally different schedule for me. It is the official start of the real work year, if you will, and I know the minute pitchers and catchers report, my life is not the same until the Padres season is over. So life gets very different in a good way. I love spring training. I hope many of you are planning on coming out to spring training and enjoying it, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that over the course of the next couple of weeks. And hard to believe that on this show we've got tonight, we've got next week in the studio, And then we're at spring training, where we're still figuring out all the plans for what the show will be from Peoria. We'll have more info on that maybe next week for you. But it is exciting. To be honest with you, I've had one final hurrah of a vacation here. Was in Colorado doing some skiing. Now I'm back home at my parents in New York doing the show here tonight. Got a wedding in Florida on Friday, and then back to San Diego, where, by the way, I don't know if I told Frank this or not, I'm officially, when I get back, moving to Ocean Beach. How about that? So, yes, Sam Levitt's going to be an OB guy starting when I get back. So I've got a busy couple of weeks. Get back to San Diego, move, get the apartment all set up, and then right after I move into my new apartment, I'm off for Peoria for 6.5 weeks. So a lot of good stuff coming up, and we shall see how it all transpires in the next couple of weeks for the San Diego Padres. And that's really in the opening segment here tonight where I want to begin. And look, I think we've spent a lot of this offseason from the Padres' perspective dealing in, talking about things that could happen, living in a pretty hypothetical world of things that could happen. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think Roki Sasaki, an excellent example. We wondered for 2 months whether Roki Sasaki would be a Padre or not. It turned out he went to L.A. We lived in that world, that sort of hypothetical world of Roki Sasaki coming to the San Diego Padres. We wondered if Jurickson Profar would find his way somehow, some way back to the San Diego Padres. We wondered earlier in the offseason, would the Padres be able to bring back a guy like Kyle Higashioka? Would the Padres even be able to bring back somebody like a Ha-Sung Kim? Certainly a fan favorite, certainly a player that meant a lot to this team, was very productive, for the most part for the Padres. You could even stretch it out to Blake Snell, right? Even though he signed early in the offseason, maybe as you headed into this offseason, into this fall and winter, you wondered maybe somehow, some way the Padres would be able to bring back a guy like a Blake Snell. Those were all things that we wondered, that we put hypotheticals on. And now we know that all those things I just mentioned are not happening. Sasaki went to L.A., Profar went to Atlanta, Higashioka went to Texas, Kim went to Tampa Bay, Snell went to the L.A. Dodgers. So the point of bringing all that up is to say this. The Padres, 2 weeks out from the start of spring training, as of today, 2 weeks from pitchers and catchers reporting, are in pretty much the same reality that they've been for the most part this offseason, where we knew very, very early on that this was going to be a scenario where A.J. Preller, if he was going to add, if he was going to make moves, it would have to be of the very creative variety. And I want to attack this reality the Padres are in right now, 2 weeks out from spring training, by bringing up something that on the morning show they talked about earlier this week, and I think it was actually the great Paulie Reindl, who brought up the different paths that the Padres could go down in the next couple of weeks, but also certainly as we get towards spring training. We know that A.J. Preller is a GM that just because pitchers and catchers report, just because spring training games begin, doesn't mean he's done dealing. Doesn't mean he's done trying to make his team better, or at the very least, making big-time moves. My goodness, we saw it last year with Dylan Cease. We saw it last year with the Luis Arraez trade. This is a general manager that doesn't necessarily operate like other general managers. So in the A.J. Preller world, you cannot discount anything just because spring training has begun. But to me, there are three paths the Padres can now go down over the course of the next few weeks. Let's go through them one by one. And a little bit later in the show, we'll talk about some of these individual players. We'll talk about some of the rumors still swirling around some of these guys. But path number one is more of what I think you would consider a retool, more of a full retool. You could make the argument that if the Padres were to get really aggressive in the trade market, if the Padres were to get pretty creative and pretty aggressive in moving players that are on expiring contracts. We know those guys, Michael King, Luis Ariz, Dylan Cease, Robert Suarez, who can have an opt-out at the end of the year. There is a path for the Padres where they could look at those 3 to 4 players and say, you know what? These guys are free agents at the end of the year. We're in a financial situation where we can't add the way we want to add, and we're going to do our best to get what we can right now for these players. There is a path where the Padres front office could look at things and say, you know what, now is the time, rather to quote-unquote run it back with this same group for the most part and give us the best chance to potentially win this year. This is the moment where we actually retool a little bit, where we actually go get, let's say, 5 to 7 or more top-end prospects to restock the farm, get guys who could help us in the long term, be under team control. That is a path, potentially, for the Padres moving forward. It's not the path I think they should take, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. It's not the path that I think they will take, but there is certainly a path where the Padres could look at things and say, now is the time to do more of a retool than maybe a lot of us would have anticipated at the start of the offseason. That's path number 1, although I don't think it's the path that the Padres will ultimately take. Path number 2 is just running this thing back. And what I mean by that is this. If the Padres can find a way financially to pay these guys, the Kings, the Ceases, the Ariz, the total payroll number, if they can find a way, if they have the financial means to get to whatever that payroll number is, and I'll include Robert Suarez in this conversation as well. The path is you keep everybody. The path is maybe you say, hey, we're going to just sort of run this thing back, keep all these key guys, and let's see where we are come middle of the summer. Let's see where we are come the trade deadline. And maybe that's the moment where you add. Or if you're not in it, maybe that's the moment where you do make moves and you do get value for these free agents to be after this season comes to an end. That is path number 2, where the Padres just say, you know what? We don't like the deals that are out there. We don't want to trade a Michael King. We don't want to trade a Dylan Cease. We don't want to trade a Luis Ariz. We can find a way to make it work financially, and we're just running this thing back. We've got a great core of players. We'll plug in the holes however we have to. Yeah, you may have Tirso or Nelas or whomever playing left field. You may have somebody that's not going to knock your socks off as that DH first base type. It may mean that you're not adding significantly anywhere else, but be assured, to me, that is an option where you just sort of roll with what you got. You may not be thrilled with who fills the question marks on this roster right now, but to me, that is path number 2, where you keep these guys and you roll, and you see what happens as the year progresses. You see where you are at the end of July towards the trade deadline, and then you assess from there. And then to me, there's path number 3, which is maybe you could argue the most likely path they take, and that is you live in the middle, right? You maybe trade a Dylan Cease. You maybe trade a Robert Suarez. You maybe trade a Luis Ariz to help you, A, get things back in return, maybe plug some holes by trading one of those guys, cutting some payroll, getting something for an impending free agent. But it is not the full retool that we talked about in option number 1, where it is, hey, we're going to move a guy like a Dylan Cease who's going to make around $14 million. We're going to get some value back for him. We're going to plug some holes, get some prospects, whatever the package might be, get whatever value you can get back for a guy like Dylan Cease. But this is far from us saying we're going to trade Cease, King, Ariz, Suarez, and we're just sort of retooling for 2025. I don't believe the Padres will do that. I would guess, if I were making a bet on it, that it's probably somewhere in the middle, that it's probably more like a path 3 where we may see one of these guys go in a trade. I don't think that would shock anyone at this point. But those are the 3 different paths I see for the Padres right now in a baseball sense moving forward 2 weeks out from spring training. Again, path 1 is you are doing more of a retool, which I don't think they're going to do. Path 2 is you're finding a way to make it work financially and you're quote-unquote running it back. And path 3 is maybe one of those guys go, you still have a lot of talent, you still have a great core of players. I don't know that one trade is going to allow you to fill all the different needs you have right now, but you at least get a little value back for an impending free agent. That would be path 3. And to me, 2 weeks out from spring training, the Padres will go in one of those directions, one of those paths. Now, if you're asking me, and I'll get Frank's take on this in a second, and Frank may agree, he may disagree. To me, if I'm A.J. Preller right now, if I'm the Padres front office right now, being presented with what they have in front of them, the core of guys they have in front of them, the free agent market they have in front of them, the financial restrictions they seemingly have in front of them, if I can make it work financially, if I can find a way to get to a payroll number, a CBT number, where I can do it, in my opinion, I think the best course of action, you keep your guys. You keep your guys. I want to keep Dylan Cease. I have no idea if Dylan Cease gets traded how I'm replacing A, a Cy Young quality pitcher, and B, 180 innings. I think Michael King could win a Cy Young this year. I have no idea how I replace the quality of a hitter in Luis Ariz. I have no idea how I replace a back-end bullpen arm in Robert Suarez. To me, if you can make the financials work, my preference, and I don't know that I would have said this at the beginning of the offseason, but this is where we are 2 weeks out to spring training. My preference is you hold on if you can to these guys. You roll with a team that I think right now should be very, very competitive to make the postseason. Yes, it may mean that you are having a Tirso Ornelas type player or, a quadruple A type player in the outfield and left field. It may mean that, yes, a Randy Vasquez, Matt Waldron type combination may have to be your 4-5 in your rotation. It may mean there are some spots on the bench and some spots in this roster with guys that you would not have expected to be on this team. But to me, I like that reality. I like that path better than trading a Michael King and getting some stuff back that either helps you long term or helps you for 2025 in filling multiple holes. I don't want to lose Michael King. I don't want to lose Dylan Cease. I don't want to lose Luis Ariz. To me, I would rather roll the dice a little bit, keep those guys if you can make it work financially, if you can get to the number you got to get to, however you got to get there, you keep the core as is, and you run with this thing and you see what happens. And you see if you can hang around into July. You see if this team can win games. You assess things at the trade deadline. To me, that's what I would love. I don't know that that's the path they will take, but in my head, that has become more of the option that I would love to see, which is, no, you're not going to have a perfect roster. No, you will roll into spring training and potentially opening day with a number of holes. I don't want to even say holes, but a number of question marks still there, and names that fill those question marks that aren't going to knock your socks off. I like that reality better than the other two paths I described. Frank Marchese back in the studio in San Diego. Your thoughts on the three paths I've described here in the opening segment.
I want Padre fans to listen to me right now and listen good. You are only missing Kyle Higashioka and Jurickson Profar from the second winningest team in franchise history. And you did that missing, 3 months of Fernando Tatis Jr., Ha-Sung Kim hitting .210 all season. You had Joe Musgrove was start and stop all year. Darvish was out for a vast majority of the season. There is nothing to be concerned about going into this season. There are certainly questions that need to be answered, but the core is still there. All of your big names, your influential, important names are all still there, and they're all healthier. They are all healthier.
Manny included.
Fernando Tatis Jr. was an all-star, the highest voted all-star for outfielders on a broken leg last year. The Padres are fine. What makes this offseason look so much worse than it is that San Francisco, Arizona, and LA got better. That's it. The West has a very, very real possibility of sending 4 teams to the postseason this year. Very, very real chance. Where the Padres fit in that 4, who knows? But the core, the main portion of the team is still there that won you the second most games in franchise history last season. There is we're starting fires over nothing here. It's not there's really no major issue.
Well, look, I think in an obviously perfect world, when you have question marks in left field and a catcher and in your rotation, etc. Look, I think we would all agree in a perfect world, the Padres would add and they would spend and all of it. And it goes back to what I talked to at the start of the show, which is we've lived, I think, in a little bit of a hypothetical world this offseason where we hoped, we wondered, would Sasaki come? Would Profar come back? Would Higashioka come back? Would Kim come back? Whatever player you want to look at. Look, the reality is, again, those things haven't happened, and we're 2 weeks out from spring training, and now you're presented with, I think, some pretty clear pathways as to what the rest of this offseason, what spring training is going to be. I know we got to get to break here. We're a little bit late for the break, so let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about this. We'll get into some other things as well in this hour, including the Padres signing Elias Diaz, who I think is going to be this team's starting catcher on opening day. So we'll talk more about that. You're listening to Inside San Diego Baseball on a Wednesday night, 97.3 The Fan. We're back with more after this. 726 on 97.3 The Fan on this Wednesday night. You're listening to Inside San Diego Baseball, our weekly show up until 9 p.m. Sam Levitt with you here on the East Coast, doing things remotely one final time this offseason. Frank Marchese doing the producing here tonight back in our San Diego studios as we continue to count down towards Padres spring training, pitchers and catchers reporting 2 weeks from today. Hard to believe. I'll be on the way to Peoria in less than 2 weeks. So we're getting there little by little. Still a lot to be answered. A lot of people wondering about what this roster will look like as a whole as we head towards spring training. And who knows, knowing A.J. Preller, we may be far from this being a finished product. We're going to see what transpires over the course of the next couple of weeks and into spring training. We had a very long first segment talking about the three different paths the Padres have moving towards spring training in the next couple of weeks, and I thought I spelled it out pretty clearly. Path one, more of a complete retool of your team, where you get very aggressive in moving guys that will be free agents at the end of the year. Path number two, you trade one of those guys to get some stuff back, to get some value, to shed some payroll if you have to do it. And path three is that you just keep these guys, all of them, King, Cease, Arise, Suarez, assuming you can make the financials work, and you see where you are come the summer. You see what this team does, what this core does, and you assess where you are as you get into the summer, as you get towards the trade deadline. And there was a comment as our opening segment was moving along, I'm going to pop it up on our YouTube stream, from Abraham Ochoa, and I think it's an interesting part of what we were talking about. Abraham writing, keep your players, and if we are not in playoff contention, then trade those who leave after the season. Again, to me, and I think Abraham makes a good point, to me, unless you absolutely have to shed payroll, if you have to shed the $14 million that Cease is going to make, or the $14 million that Arise is going to make, or what Suarez is going to make, what King ultimately will make in arbitration, to me, there's a real path of you see where you are come the summer, and guess what? You can always, even though it may not be what you're going to get right now for those guys, you can always move those guys come the trade deadline. You think people aren't going to want Michael King? You think teams aren't going to want a Dylan Cease down the stretch, a Luis Arise, a Robert Suarez? To me, you will have that opportunity if you have to, if it makes sense, if you're not in contention, to move those guys in the summer. But when you have a team, a core that I think right now is currently constructed, has a real chance to be a postseason team, and then you get into the dance and you see what happens. I said it in the opening segment. I just would rather roll with what you got. It won't be a perfect team. It won't be a perfect roster. But my goodness, when you got the core the Padres got, you roll the dice and you see what that team can do in the first half of the season, and you assess when you get to the summertime. That's my opinion. I've had texts with fans, with others who talk about the Padres that have different opinions, that, think, now's the time where maybe you look at grabbing major value for those players, and maybe you look at a more aggressive, quote-unquote, retooling. I just don't see it that way. To me, when you have Manny at third, you've got Xander at short, those guys aren't getting any younger. When you've got Merrill in center, and I can go on and on. You know the names. I don't need to list all the names of the Padres core. When you have that, I don't think, and I'm not saying that even trading, a C. Santa King is necessarily punting, but I think it's a hard sell. I think you move two of those guys of Arise, Cease, and King. I think it's a hard sell to say that, you're putting the best team you can on the field in 2025. I mean, it may make sense. It may be logical. But again, you have to tell me, how on earth are you replacing Michael King? How are you replacing Dylan Cease in just the innings? that guy's going to eat up if he's healthy. So it's my opinion on it. Everybody may not agree on it, but we'll see what the Padres do. Look, they're in a fascinating spot in a baseball sense. They really are, right? As of 48 hours ago, they hadn't made a major league signing. They finally did in Elias Diaz. We'll get more into him in our next segment. But you just sit here and you wonder, is this just going to be what the offseason is, for better or for worse? Extremely quiet, extremely unaggressive one way or another, which we know is not the A.J. Preller way? Or is this going to be a flurry at the final buzzer? Is this going to be a flurry in the final couple of weeks before spring training and maybe into spring training? Are we going to see a ton of moves after pitchers and catchers report? That's the key question. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a fascinating question, and it presents a fascinating situation for A.J. Preller and the Padres front office. Now, if you're just joining us and you're just hopping in the car after work, and this news only came out in the last handful of hours, big piece of news earlier today, Ha-Seong Kim going to the Tampa Bay Rays on, and I want to pull up the numbers here to make sure I get it right. It was a 2-year deal for a grand total. I should have had this pulled up. Frank, you tell me if you see it first. $29 million. Okay. So Tampa Bay, Ha-Seong Kim, 2 years, $29 million, and opt out after this season. Obviously, Kim hurt his shoulder, ended his season a year ago. Frank, and I'm wondering what you thought when you initially saw this. Look, I think when you zoom out on Ha-Seong, on where he was at entering last season, coming off what he did in 2023, I mean, let's remember, there were people who thought Ha-Seong Kim would be a $100+ million player after what he did in 2023 and what he does defensively. So you fast forward now to this offseason. Look, he gets a guaranteed $29 million if he ends up not opting out at the end of the year. It's sort of a pillow deal because he can reset his value. With that said, he's got the shoulder issue. We still don't know when he's going to return. And we'll see what Ha-Seong Kim ultimately does in the long term contract-wise, what he ultimately makes. But look, we're in such a different time now, Frank, where, you can go very quickly, and we're seeing it. I think Pete Alonso is a good example. There are other guys who are a good example, where over the course of a year or two, it can go very quickly from looking like you are going to make a ton of money to you making pretty limited amount of money. Now, $29 million is not limited to the normal person, but in baseball world, it is. It's just interesting to me that a 2-year, $29 million guarantee is what Ha-Seong Kim ultimately gets in his first round of free agency. Of course, if he comes back from the injury, Frank, and he has a great year, then I'm sure he's going to make a lot more money. Next offseason, he'll opt out and he'll have reestablished his value. But look, from the Kim perspective, it does put a lot of pressure on him to come back from that injury and play well, because that big bag that I think a lot of us thought he would get after 23 clearly wasn't there for him, and that could be a mix of not a great year in 24 and his injury. But now he'll get the opportunity to try to reset his value, and we'll see what happens now with Ha-Seong Kim.
If $14 million was way too much for a guy who, as you said, is going to miss about half the season, I would not expect him back until June with the shoulder, because, they say May, but he's got to get wound up. He's got to get in baseball shape again and get going. Last year, he hit .233, 11 home runs, 47 RBIs.
Yeah, it was not a good year.
I was surprised that he played in 121 games last year.
No,
I thought he was out. I thought he was out for longer.
He was healthy. I want to say that injury was like mid-August. Without looking, was like mid-August. That sort of makes sense. He was healthy aside from that. Look, he did not have a good year. I think before the injury, I still would have assumed he would have done better as far as years and total dollars. I think the injury obviously plays a role in it.
Definitely,
I do think
yes.
Ha-Seong Kim has a good year when he comes back. I do think he'll reset his value. I don't know that he'll ever get anywhere close to what we thought he might be worth after 23 when he was so good and you factored in the defense and the versatility. And look, there were people who thought Ha-Seong Kim, if he had a good year last year, would get a big time contract in free agency after this past season. Obviously, look, there's factors for it. Didn't have a great year, had the injury. I do want to touch on it as well from the Padres standpoint. Look, you lose a fan favorite. Obviously, he was somebody extremely well liked inside that clubhouse, close with a lot of the guys. Certainly one of the real heartbeats of the San Diego Padres. I never thought there was really any possibility or it ever made sense for the Padres to bring him back for a myriad of reasons. The biggest of which is, you didn't need another middle infield type. The needs are so much greater than that right now. And look, the Padres, I can't imagine with the financial limitations we're ever going to consider paying him $14 million for next year. So at the end of the day, it's not surprising at all that Ha-Seong Kim is no longer a Padre. But look, he is somebody that was a fan favorite, did a really nice job here for the most part, and does provide great defense and great versatility at minimum. So he'll be missed, I think, in that sense.
I would agree with that, but I'm glad you brought up the defense. Now, Ha-Seong Kim, over the course of his career playing, this is going between his time at second, third, and short, has made 31 errors in his career. You know how many he made last year?
So he's made 31
total.
Ever, you said?
Yes, total between him playing at second, third, and short.
His defense wasn't nearly as good. I'm going to say he made 16 last year.
It wasn't that bad. Jeez, he had 11.
Okay,
11 errors. He's had 25 errors in his career while playing shortstop. Almost half of his errors at short came last year.
Yeah,
he had a bad year by any metric that you put him up against.
I'm with you. Ha-Seong did not have a good year last year. It was not the same defense. Offensively, it was nowhere close to what it was in 2023. And quite frankly, look, I can't compare it to 23, but the base running mistakes, there were times where it drove you crazy with Ha-Seong Kim last year, okay? And look, I know there are people on our station who have talked about the base running mistakes, and it drives them crazy. I can't blame you. And look, that stuff drives me crazy too at times when you're constantly making base running mistakes and head-scratching decisions on the base paths. I totally get it. Look, I think Ha-Seong, if he's healthy when he comes back to the Tampa Bay Rays, whenever that is, I am sure I think there's a very good chance that Ha-Seong has a really nice year when he comes back, and he's a good player for the Rays. He's not a bad player. He's a good player, and we saw the peak of what Ha-Seong Kim can be in 2023. And if he ever reaches that apex again, that's going to be really great for him and whatever team he's on. I don't know that he will get to that apex again. It's the same sort of question in a different way that Jerks and Profar is going to have to answer in Atlanta. If he's going to reach that apex again, different situation, different player. Again, he'll be missed. Fan favorite. Look, I know a lot of fans loved Ha-Seong, so I feel bad for the fans that won't get to watch him anymore in the brown and gold. But, we'll see what Ha-Seong Kim does. We'll see what he produces for the Tampa Bay Rays, and we go from there. And, look, while we've talked about the core of guys coming back, and this is a team that I think even right now is constructed, should be very competitive in 2025. The reality is there are some really key components of this roster, of this team, of this clubhouse that aren't going to be there. It's going to be a different team in a different year. There's going to be no Profar, no Ha-Seong Kim. I mean, you want to talk about two clubhouse guys, two favorites inside that room. You could argue that Kim and Profar are 1 and 2 up there with what they meant to that team, to the vibes, how well liked both those guys were. So it will be a different team, and it will be a different clubhouse, albeit I still think a team that has a real shot as currently constructed with the names they have in there right now. Let's step aside. When we come back, we'll talk about Elias Diaz. We've not talked about let's be honest, the most major signing the Padres have had so far this offseason. And even though Elias Diaz may not, and I've said this term like 3 times now so far on the show, knock your socks off. I've got to figure out a different way to say knock your socks off. He may not knock your socks off, excite you tremendously as a signing, but the reality is, I think he's going to be this team's starting catcher on opening day. So we should talk about Elias Diaz, the Padres catching situation. We'll address that when we return. You can also call us 833-288-0973, 833-288-0973, the phone number to call if you want to get involved on this Wednesday night. It's Inside San Diego Baseball on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Back here on 97.3 The Fan on this Wednesday night. Sam Levitt with you. It's Inside San Diego Baseball as we talk all things Padres baseball and Major League Baseball. We are 2 weeks away from the official start of spring training. Pitchers and catchers reporting to Peoria, Arizona. I will be out there every day of spring training when things begin in Peoria in just about 2 weeks. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Fan Fest at Petco Park on Saturday at the top of the hour. We'll talk a little bit more about that because 97.3 The Fan did announce some very exciting plans for Fan Fest at Petco Park this Saturday. So we'll talk about that at 8 p.m. and get you all set for what to expect on our side of things at Fan Fest as we continue to talk about the Padres, all these different options, scenarios, paths that they can go down as we continue to assess this roster and figure out what A.J. Preller and company may or may not do as we head towards spring training and head towards opening day. One thing that we do know they did was sign Elias Diaz, a guy who finished last year with the Padres, was on the Padres postseason roster. Elias Diaz coming out yesterday, signing with the Padres, reportedly 1-year deal, $3.5 million, a mutual option for 2026. Believe it or not, and probably not news to you if you've been following along this offseason, the Padres' first major league free agent signing. Kind of amazing to say, but that's where we are. First free agent signing at the major league level. So Elias Diaz last year, I thought, did a good job defensively, was solid, didn't have a ton of plate appearances where I can even really judge much on what he did. And I think the question with Elias Diaz, well, let's start with this. I think Elias Diaz, unless something really crazy happens in spring training, where he gets beat out by a Luis Campusano or even a Martin Maldonado for a starting spot on this team. To me, Elias Diaz, when you sign him for $3.5 million, to me it indicates you plan on that guy being, for the most part, your starting catcher on opening day. Now, look, we know in 2025, very rarely do you have a guy who's going to play every single day behind the plate, right? We saw it last year. At times, it was more of a straight platoon between Kyle Higashioka and Luis Campusano, and whoever that backup is will play quite a bit, I'm sure. But Elias Diaz, what he does bring, I think, and you know what you're getting in this sense, is a good defender, a veteran-type presence behind the plate, a veteran-type presence that can handle your pitching staff, which is so important to the Padres, as we know. We saw what Kyle Higashioka did with this staff last year, how highly so many guys talked of Higgy last year. It's such an important part of your team that nobody talks about. Forget what a catcher does offensively. What he does with the pitching staff, I think, is one of the most important things on any team that nobody ever talks about. And you do know that with Elias Diaz, you do have a real veteran, a guy who's worked with so many different guys for so many years behind the plate. And that's really critical. It really is. And we don't talk about it enough. So I like that. I like that the Padres will have somebody in Elias Diaz who, A, was on the team for at least a little bit last year, has some familiarity with this pitching staff, and B, is somebody who you hope, in all likelihood, can really handle the staff. The question with Elias Diaz will be this. Can he at least be a little closer to the Colorado version of himself offensively? What is he going to give you offensively? Because when you look at what Elias Diaz was in Colorado from about 2021 through 2023, I mean, if you got anywhere in the neighborhood of this type of offensive production, I think you would be thrilled. You'd be thrilled with Elias Diaz, who will be 34 this season. What he did in 2021 offensively, Diaz, 18 home runs, 44 RBIs, hit 246. Again, these aren't going to be amazing numbers, but, look, Kyle Higashioka, he came out of nowhere last year and gave you a great year. Could you have something similar, at least, or at least within the neighborhood, happen with Elias Diaz? That's what we're going through here. 2021, again, 18 home runs, 44 RBIs. 2022, played in 105 games, hit only 9 home runs, 51 RBIs, not as good of a year. Then 2023 ends up being an all-star, 14 home runs, 72 RBIs, had a 725 OPS, hit 267. I don't know that he's going to do that with 72 RBIs, but if Elias Diaz had 10 to 12 home runs and 50 RBIs and played really good defense and handled your pitching staff well, to me, that would totally check the box of what I think the Padres need behind the plate. I mean, it may not be a perfect scenario, but if you can get just enough offense from Elias Diaz, to me, offensively, with the names they have in this lineup, that should be enough at the catching position. And again, that doesn't include the question mark of left field, the question mark of your DH spot. I understand that. Those are all very, very key questions when you talk about the Padres lineup. But if you can get a solid enough offensive output from Elias Diaz, to me, he's a good enough defender, a veteran-type presence behind the plate, where you could look at a guy who's really solid. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but solid enough. You know, Kyle Higashioka came out of nowhere last year to be a guy who hit a ton of home runs. You knew what you were getting from him defensively as far as a veteran-type presence behind the plate. To me, you're hoping for some kind of similar scenario with Elias Diaz. He probably is not going to be Kyle Higashioka and hit near 20 home runs, but you can hope that he's something like, at least in the neighborhood of what he was in Colorado. That may not happen. He may not be anywhere near that offensive player, and if he isn't, then so be it. And you're going to have to deal with that. And perhaps that means you have to see what your other options are on an everyday basis behind the plate. But again, to me, when you're talking about Elias Diaz for $3.5 million, as far as free agent catchers that were remaining on the market, he was the best one out there. He was. So again, is it going to make you super excited? Like, can you guarantee what Elias Diaz is going to be offensively? You can't. Would you have felt better, more confident, more sure if it was Kyle Higashioka coming back? You would. But to me, it was a totally fair and smart, in my opinion, roll the dice at $3.5 million to see, hey, can he give you enough offense, and can he be a good defender, good battery mate behind the plate with his staff, and you roll the dice and you see what he is at the start of the year. We'll talk a little bit more about the catching situation at the top of the hour because, look, I think, while we can assume that Elias Diaz will be the guy at the start of the year behind the plate for the most part, look, I think there will be opportunity for others, including, namely, Luis Campusano. If you go out and you have a great spring, like, I'm not walking into Peoria with 100% confidence that Elias Diaz will be your starting catcher. I think he's going to be. But we'll talk a little bit more about that at the top of the hour. And at the top of the hour as well, one trade the Padres made, which I think, I don't know how much you would read into it, but I do think there are some different tentacles on this trade that we can get into. But the Padres acquiring right-handed reliever Ron Marinaccio from the White Sox for cash. That was last week on Friday. Marinaccio had been designated for assignment earlier in the week, so the Padres get a guy who could very well be in their bullpen at the major league level at the start of the year. We'll talk a little bit more about Marinaccio, but also sort of blended into a budding question I have about the Padres' rotation and how they may utilize some guys that have starting experience in the past. And it's something we talked about with A.J. Preller at the winter meetings. It's been broached before. It's not going to be breaking news, but I do think it's something to keep an eye on when you see the Padres acquire additional major league relief talent. It gets the wheels spinning in my head a little bit because this Padres bullpen, A, should be really good as currently constructed, and B, has a lot of depth. I mean, you want to talk about a part of this team where there actually is quite a lot of depth? To me, that's the Padres bullpen. It is when you talk about Suarez and Adam and Estrada. And you can go through the list of guys, right, of quality arms and some of the younger arms. And we'll talk more about these guys in our second hour, like Sean Reynolds and Alec Jacobs. Some guys that have showed promise in the past, and they could have a much bigger impact on this team in 2025. So we'll talk about the bullpen a little bit. We'll get into that Marinaccio trade. I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's Marinaccio and not Marinaccio. Maybe Frank will correct me during the break. But we'll talk about the trade the Padres made for the right-handed reliever. We'll talk a little bit more about the Elias Diaz situation, the catching situation for the Padres. We'll get into some other major league stories as well, including some interesting comments from Yankees owner Hal Steinbrenner. We've got a new prospect ranking from ESPN's Kylie McDaniel. Giants and the Reds making a trade earlier today. Maybe get into some potential breakout stars for the Padres in 2025. Talk about some other free agents as well. It's hour number 2 of Inside San Diego Baseball coming up when we return. Much more Padres talk on this Wednesday night. You're listening to San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Hour 2 of Inside San Diego Baseball coming up.
It's time for an inside look at what's cooking on the San Diego Padres hot stove as the team gets ready for the 2025 season.
Swing and a miss. Padres win.
Sam Levitt breaks down the Padres offseason moves and provides an in-depth look at everything you need to know before the Padres take the field for spring training.
Swinging a high fly ball. Deep left center. This one way back and gone.
Plus the latest headlines from around Major League Baseball and analysis of what's happening around around the big leagues.
Breaking news out of baseball.
Welcome to Inside San Diego Baseball with the Padres Radio Network's pre- and post-game host, Sam Levitt.
Hour number 2 of Inside San Diego Baseball on this Wednesday night on 97.3 The Fan, taking you up until 9 p.m. as we talk all things Padres baseball and beyond. Sam Levitt with you in our East Coast 97.3 The Fan studios, if you will. Frank Marchese doing the producing tonight back in our Odyssey San Diego studio. Still a lot to discuss on this Wednesday night, as I think we've done a good job in the first hour covering many of the different options the Padres have moving forward 2 weeks out from pitchers and catchers reporting to Peoria, Arizona. We'll get a little bit deeper into the Elias Diaz catching situation, the signing the Padres made reportedly as of yesterday. We'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. We'll talk about Ron Marinaccio, the right-handed reliever the Padres traded for last week as well, how that could sort of play into the Padres' thinking with their pitching staff at the start of the year in 2025. Before we do all that, a couple of notes for you as we reset things here on Inside San Diego Baseball on this Wednesday night. Again, I am in New York tonight at the Levitt household on Long Island. My last hurrah of a vacation of some time back with my parents before I go to spring training in a couple of weeks. And I want to set the scene for the listeners right now, because now typically I'm one of two places during the course of the season. I'm either in the studio or I'm at the ballpark, which many of you know and many of you have come to say hello over the course of the last 3 years. But right now I'm in a very unique situation for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm in my parents' house, so I'm sitting here with a headset on. It's now 11:03 p.m. on a Wednesday night, so it's very late, but we're broadcasting here back to the West Coast. But I've also, and I'm going to describe the scenario. I've also got my mom to my left here, just sitting here watching me. A very proud mom. Just sitting here watching me. So she doesn't often get the chance to watch the live broadcast. But yes, my mom is here enjoying the show in person, in live, and trying to get on the show. She says hello, San Diego. So very nice. Susan is here enjoying the program right here with a live audience.
So now that this begs the question, is it more awkward with me sitting there watching you do your show or your mom watching you?
That's a great question. I think you, Frank.
As I expected. Continue.
I think you. I don't know. It's a tough question. But yes, Susan is here enjoying the program. So I have a live audience. It's like I have a live studio audience here tonight in New York. So that's some good stuff. Before we get back into Padres talk, I also want to talk about FanFest, which is on Saturday at Petco Park, and we announced it on the station a little bit earlier today. We will be broadcasting on 97.3 The Fan live at Petco Park from 10 to 4 on Saturday at FanFest. That will be behind Section 113. If you don't know where Section 113 is, it's on the first base side. So all you do is on the main concourse there at the lower level, you walk down the first base side. I'm sure, I don't know where exactly, how it's all going to look. I'm sure we will have plenty of 97.3 The Fan branding, a tent, a table. I'm sure we'll have all that. So you can go meet and greet your favorite 97.3 The Fan personalities, including Ben Higgins and Stephen Woods and Annie Heilbrunn and Craig Elston and Braden Soprenet and Paul Reindl and Tony Gwynn Jr., Chris Ello, Matt Scraby. But you won't meet me there because I'm not going to be there at FanFest on Saturday. Prior commitment, have a wedding, to be honest with you. I had been scheduled to go to the wedding for some time. So I will not be at FanFest on Saturday. I'm sorry to miss it. I'm sure I would have been around and would have been fun to see everybody before we head to spring training. But no Sam Levitt at FanFest on Saturday, but you'll be able to see everybody else. So again, 10 to noon, Ben and Woods, noon to 2, Annie and Elston, 2 to 4, Gwynn and Chris. That's the schedule on the station. And again, if you're going to FanFest at Petco Park on Saturday, you'll be able to see all your favorite 97.3 The Fan personalities at FanFest on Saturday, and should be a fun time at FanFest. A lot of players will be there. A lot of nice opportunities for the fans to do a lot of different things on Saturday. So should be a lot of fun. Sorry to miss it, but such is scheduling as we get towards the final couple of weeks of the baseball offseason. So we talked about it quite a bit in our opening hour, in our last segment, and that was the Padres signing Elias Diaz to a 1-year, $3.5 million deal, mutual option for 2026. And I think safe to say, at least you can presume, that Elias Diaz will be, or at least be in a prime position to be this team's starting catcher on opening day. Now, I think the question with the Padres catching situation at this point is this. It's going to be Elias Diaz and who, as far as your two catchers on this roster? Is it a guarantee that that backup catcher is Luis Campusano? I don't know that it is. To me, he is the obvious leading candidate to be the other catcher that isn't Elias Diaz on this roster. But look, I'm not breaking any news to you that Campy had a really tough year in 2024. He had 227, 281 on base percentage, 361 OPS. There were some really not great moments defensively. Option to AAA late last season. Wasn't on the postseason roster. I mean, it's easy to forget because Diaz never played in the postseason. But remember, the two catchers on this roster in the postseason were Kyle Higashioka and Elias Diaz. Luis Campusano, who was on this team almost all year, was not on the postseason roster. I mean, let's not forget, he got optioned back to AAA at one point last year. So I think there are a couple of questions when you look at the Padres catching situation. A, assuming Elias Diaz is your number one, who's your number two? Is that Campy? I would assume it is right now. But look, to me, there's going to be an opportunity if a Martin Maldonado comes in and does a really nice job at spring training and impresses, and the Padres feel like they want another veteran on their roster and another veteran option, even though Maldonado had a really, really rough year last season and defensively wasn't the same, offensively was not good at all. But is there a scenario where the Padres roll out of spring training and say, you know what, at least to start the year, you know what, we'll put Maldonado on the big league roster. Let's see what happens with Diaz and Maldonado at least to start the year. I think that's a possibility. Look, you've got somebody in Brett Sullivan who has been with the organization forever, who has come up at times and done a really nice job, I've thought, both behind the plate and has had some moments offensively. He's never had a real opportunity to get any sort of regular playing time. Again, the question is, and I'm getting into Sullivan, I mean, these are names that are a bit down the depth chart, but that's the question to me. Is there going to be some real competition for that second catching spot in particular? I don't know, based on Luis Campusano's season a year ago, that it's just a given that it's going to be Campy. I mean, it may be. I would assume, if I were putting a bet on it right now, I would assume it's going to be Elias Diaz and Luis Campusano. I'm not 100% sure, though, on the Campusano part. Based on his season last year, based on Martin Maldonado being there, we'll see. The other question I have about the catching position is I also don't think, even though you've signed Diaz for $3.5 million, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that he's going to be your starting catcher, for the most part at least at the start of the year, you know, is there still an opportunity if Luis Campusano shows up at spring training and has a wonderful spring? Could you look at a scenario where Campy wins that job? I mean, I think that's possible. So, again, I think it will be much like last year, in all likelihood, a very fluid situation at catcher for the San Diego Padres. I do not think because Elias Diaz was signed that means that Diaz is going to just be the guy no matter what. It kind of reminds you of last year, where let's remember, A, Kyle Higashioka was not playing nearly as much as Luis Campusano at the start of the year, and B, Higgy got off to a really slow start offensively. I mean, it took a couple of months for Kyle Higashioka to establish himself behind the plate last year. So it's an interesting situation behind the plate for this team. What is Elias Diaz? Is Luis Campusano definitely that second guy at the catching spot? Is there an opportunity for a guy like Campy to win back the job in a sense? Those are all really interesting questions. What is Martin Maldonado? Is that just a flyer on Martin Maldonado? If he comes in and has a nice spring, are the Padres more serious about putting him on the roster, which would, I would presume, kick Campy off the roster, at least early on? These are really, I think, interesting questions at catcher. And again, I would encourage you to remember that last year it was really fluid. Like, this changed a lot behind the plate. So you just never know how this stuff works out behind the plate. And, when you don't have that bona fide number one guy. So we'll see what Elias Diaz is. We'll see how it all shakes out as we get to spring training and into the regular season. We'll talk a little bit more. I've been teasing Ron Marinaccio for a couple of segments now, and we will talk a little bit more in depth about him on the other side of the break. But again, the Padres landing righty reliever Ron Marinaccio from the White Sox. That was for cash considerations on Friday. He had been DFA'd by the White Sox earlier last week. Just in a quick nutshell here, it's a pretty low cost, or I should say low risk move for the Padres, right? 3 big league seasons, parts of 3 big league seasons for Marinaccio, 3.22 ERA, 137 strikeouts and 114 plus innings. So he is somebody who does pick up a lot of strikeouts, which you like. He spent most of last year at AAA in the Yankees organization, had a really good year, a 2.04 ERA. By the way, I said he came from the White Sox. He never actually played in the White Sox system, but he got DFA'd by them, earlier this offseason. But you look at the numbers again, 2.04 ERA at AAA last year, made 16 big league appearances, had a 3.86 ERA. The fielding independent pitching was, at 4.92, so it was higher, indicated, his performance was probably, a little bit lower than what the ERA indicated. But some of the numbers, just the very basic numbers, you look at it and you say, okay, if he's sort of a low leverage guy in your bullpen, which is what I think he would be right now, it's worth taking a flyer on. We'll step aside. When we come back, I want to get a little bit deeper into Marinaccio because it got my brain thinking a little bit. If the Padres make another move or two to add more bullpen depth, what it could actually mean in the bigger picture of this pitching staff entering 2025. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we return. We'll also get into some other Major League headlines a little bit later this hour, and we'll continue to talk all things Padres baseball here on 97.3 The Fan. It's Inside San Diego Baseball on a Wednesday night. Back with more after this. Back here on 97.3 The Fan on this Wednesday night inside San Diego baseball, taking you up until 9 p.m. as we talk all things Padres as we inch closer and closer to spring training. Sam Levitt with you for Frank Marchese inside our San Diego studios doing the producing here tonight. Now, Frank, a man of many, many talents. If you're watching on YouTube, you may see this ticker on the bottom of our screen, which is presenting all the local scores around San Diego. So I'm actually gonna let Frank Marchese here because Frank very much likes to, during our once a week 2-hour program, likes me to update you on what's going on around San Diego. He may give me a goal score to tell you about. He may give me a San Diego State score, a UC San Diego score, a San Diego Toreros score. So Frank, I want to throw it to you back in the studio. You tell me what's on this ticker for the people listening on the radio, and what games, what scores should we know about on this Wednesday night? Little pause on the baseball talk.
Yeah, so my OCD needed something to do tonight, and it chose we're going to put a ticker on the bottom of the screen tonight. So that's exactly what we've done. Only one local game in action tonight. The Toronto Marlies just took a 2-1 lead over the San Diego Gulls. That's in the second period right now. Upcoming college basketball games coming up for tomorrow. It will be Pepperdine will be here to take on USD, the Toreros, at 7 p.m. UCSD will be at Hawaii tomorrow. Women's college. I can't read that until after the ticker. I got to shut the ticker off in order to see it. But it's coming around on the thing. I know you guys on the radio. I
want to be clear. I threw this at Frank with no warning that I was going to have him read the scores here. So I'll buy him a little time until the ticker keeps moving. Go ahead.
It'll be Pepperdine versus USD at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Okay. Same thing with UCSD at Hawaii tomorrow, 8 p.m. for that. Women's college will be USD at Gonzaga at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Hawaii will be here against USD for women's tomorrow at 7 p.m. On Saturday, Loyola Marymount will be here. They will take on the USD men's basketball team. Women's college will be San Diego State at New Mexico at 1 p.m. And then also on Saturday, lacrosse, the Saskatchewan Rush are here. They will play the San Diego Seals.
Okay, very good. Very comprehensive, Frank. Nicely done. It's funny. I have not been to a Seals game yet. I went to one last year.
Go.
Ton of fun.
Yes, they
ton
are
of fun.
amazing.
I cannot say enough about the great time I had at the Seals game last year. So I got to get to one of those at some point. May not happen before I go to spring training, but they play pretty deep into the spring, I think.
About
if that's
April,
correct.
I think, is when the season
Yeah, so
ends.
I may be able to get to a Seals game when I return from spring training. So, yeah, encourage everybody, go out to the local games, support the local teams. Nice job by Frank there, reading off the local scores through the weekend. And I said this in the first hour at the very start of the show. One of the reasons I don't think I can get to a Seals game is the fact that I'm moving. Now. I'm not moving out of San Diego. Nobody get nervous out there, but I'm going from PB to OB. I'm going to be an Ocean Beach guy. And in the chat, and for those of you who listen to the Padres post-game show, you may know what I think, Frank, safe to say one of our more regular famous callers at this point, Gonzo in OB. So Gonzo and I are going to be neighbors. I don't know that Gonzo knew that before tonight.
You keep doxing yourself. You keep telling people where you live, and then you're gonna be surprised. Like, oh my God, this fan showed up at my front door.
No, well, I didn't tell my address. Yeah, but I've talked about living in PB
give people
for 3 years.
Enough time. Give the right person enough time, and they will find you, bud.
Okay, well that's okay. I don't mind. Well, don't show up to my apartment, but if you see me on the streets of OB, you can certainly say hello. So, yes, Gonzo and I we're going to be neighbors all of a sudden. I'm sure Gonzo, who I see at the ballpark from time to time, will be very happy. So, yes, got a lot going on before spring training starts, and should be fun as we continue to get things back to baseball, talk about the Padres on this Wednesday night. All right, so we've talked about Ron Marinaccio, right? We talked about it before the break. Again, I know some of you out there may be thinking to yourself, hey, does this deserve 2 segments, the Padres trading for Ron Marinaccio? I get it, but number one, he's a guy who at times has been pretty good in the major leagues, could certainly be a part of this bullpen at a spring training. The thing that I find interesting about a move like this from a Padres standpoint, beyond just acquiring a guy like Ron Marinaccio, who could be in your bullpen, is this part of it. You know, Frank, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea that the Padres could go down a path where, you know, they, one way or another, have a rotation where your final 2 spots in this rotation could be very, very much open heading into spring training. We talked about the idea that it could be, you know, the 1-2 punch of Waldron and Vasquez in the back end of your rotation on opening day. That is, at this moment, I think a very distinct possibility. Now, a possibility that we talked about, especially at the winter meetings, A.J. Preller was asked a lot about it, was the idea that the Padres could take a guy or two in their bullpen that has starting experience and move him back into the rotation. Candidates for that would very likely be an Adrian Morejon, who has plenty of starting experience. I think that's a little risky. I can get into that in a second. Brian Hoeing, you know, long man out of the bullpen. You could try, you know, transitioning him into the rotation. Stephen Kolek has starting experience. There are a handful of relievers that you could realistically envision making that transition to the rotation. So a move like Marinaccio, to me, I do wonder a little bit, and if we see the Padres make any similar moves where they add even more depth to what I think is an already pretty deep bullpen, it does make me wonder a little bit if that is a signal at all, and it may not be, but a signal at all to the idea of we may show up to spring training and learn that a Morejon or a Hoeing or a Kolek or somebody else may be transitioning into a starter, so you go out and you add a little bit more depth or at least some more options to your bullpen. It makes me wonder because, again, right now, hey, you've got 2 spots in that rotation that we can't definitively say who fills those spots. It could be Vasquez, could be Brito, could be Waldron, number of other names you could throw in there, but it also could be a guy like an Adrian Morejon. So, again, I know to spend this much time on the Marinaccio trade, you know, it's probably not a huge deal, but I just wonder if we see another move or two like that to add some depth relief-wise, if you may look at a scenario where you could have a guy or two actually competing for a starting spot, a starting rotation spot, when we show up at spring training. I think that's something that clearly has been on the table for the Padres when it comes to some of these guys, like a Morejon, like a Hoeing. I don't know that they're going to do it, but I do wonder a little bit if we see another move like this, if that could indicate that is on the horizon.
It's a very real possibility, and just looking at some of Marinaccio's numbers here, you also got to think Johnny Brito as well. He's another one of those. He's another one of those guys, because remember at the end of last year he went down to get stretched out to become a starter towards the end of the year.
Good point, Frank. Yes.
And part of the reason why you're going to see these moves is because all of the depth that you had is in Miami right now. It's in Washington right now. They're all gone. So yeah, it's a good question to ask. And it's a very interesting thought to have, because you do have these guys who are long relievers / 4 or 5 inning starters that you could look to promote, especially if a guy like Waldron doesn't have the greatest start to the season. You're going to need to replace him with somebody, whether it's with Brito or Morejon or whoever. It's going to be an option. And if they're tied to the bullpen, then you're going to be forced to ride it out with somebody who's not cutting it at the back end of the rotation.
Yeah, I will say this about Morejon, and I'm actually happy we're talking about this, because I don't think beyond when A.J. Preller spoke about it at the winter meetings, I don't know that we've really ever discussed this. look, I know there are people out there, there are fans out there, and there may be people in the Padres organization who are really intrigued by the idea of Adrian Morejon transitioning back into a starting role, especially after he had a really, really, really nice year, a career year. I would not do that if I were the Padres, and I'll tell you why. Adrian is somebody who's dealt with a ton of injuries, who was finally, for the most part, healthy last year. He's also somebody that's been very up and down in his career. Finally, for the most part, was super consistent last year. I mean, you can look at the overall numbers for Adrian Morejon. Let me pull it up here quickly. He had a 2.83 ERA, 60 appearances, 63-plus innings, 71 strikeouts, 21 walks. I mean, look, there was a while there in the first half of the season where he was basically one of three guys that you really, really trusted in that bullpen. It was Suarez, Estrada, and Morejon. Don't forget what the Padres bullpen was before the trade deadline. I mean, there was a time there where it was those three, the big three we would call them, and it was everybody else. So, you know, if I'm the Padres, and they may not agree, if I'm the Padres, I'm not playing with that with Morejon. To me, you finally have him in a spot where he's healthy, where he's been really effective. He's from the left side, which you like. He can face lefties. You know, he can find that lefty lane late in a game. Padres don't really have that without Tanner Scott anymore. Okay, you're going to need that hard-throwing, dominant type lefty. I don't know what Yuki Matsui is going to be for this team in 2025, what kind of step forward he may or may not take. To me, with Morejon, I'd really try to keep him in that role. That's my opinion. He also has starting experience. The Padres, at this moment, are in need of more starting pitching, of more depth, okay? I guess my point is I'd be very, very careful with that, because I think you finally, for Adrian, who's been around for a long time, you finally have found a real nice spot for him where he excelled after a year, and I wouldn't play with it. That's my opinion, but they may think otherwise. We're going to see when we get to spring training, because those are the type of things that when you show up to spring training, you learn. And a lot of times we don't know those things until we literally get to spring training, until you see who's throwing when, who's in what group, how guys are lining up as spring training games start and live BPs start. These are things that you start finding out once you get there. I'd be careful, is my point, Frank, with Adrian Morejon. I like the role he's in. I don't know if I'd really, rock that equilibrium, if you will.
I agree 100%. And I would say if you're going to do that with somebody, I would do it with Johnny Brito. That would be who I would do it with as far as stretching guys out. But you also, if you do decide to do it with Morejon, you can always hope that Tom Cosgrove finds what he had in 2023 again, and he can be that guy. It's kind of like, and I'm sorry, but it's kind of like when the Mets moved Lugo to the bullpen. He found a spot. He found a niche where he really worked, and he worked a lot better than where he was before. And I think that's kind of the same situation that Morejon finds himself in now, is that he found a spot. It really works for him. So let's keep him there.
Now, look, I think, and we'll wrap up the bullpen conversation, go to break here in a second, but I think the good news, if the Padres were to transition Morejon into the rotation, okay, which may be a possibility for them going into spring training, the good news is this. I do think, even though Morejon has found a nice home with what he's doing, they're in a spot where it's not the craziest idea in the world, in part because they've got a deep pen.
Yes.
They've got Robert Suarez. They've got Jason Adam. They've got Jeremiah Estrada. They've got Yuki Matsui. Hopefully he takes a step forward. Look, there are two names that I think you really have to consider in this bullpen as two names that could be like real breakout stars, potentially, for the Padres this season. One of them is Sean Reynolds.
Yep.
Like, people forget how good he was in very, very limited opportunity. He had a 0.82 ERA, 9 appearances in the major leagues. He struck out 21 guys in 11 innings. Okay? Sean Reynolds, I think, is not only going to get a big-time opportunity to make this team out of spring training, I think there's a chance by the middle of this season that Sean Reynolds is a high-leverage guy in this bullpen. That's what he sort of showed when he got his opportunities last year. Alec Jacob, very good for the most part when he's had major league opportunities the last couple of years. So again, it's just an interesting thought process here with their bullpen. You know, when you look at their starting pitching needs, again, I'm relating it all the way back to the Marinaccio trade, but it's like, maybe there are some signs here in a number of different ways, that it gets you thinking maybe one of these relievers, whether it's a Morahone or somebody else, may be one of those guys they try to stretch out.
I'm telling you, with Sean Reynolds, anything that comes his way is bound to be high. I didn't realize the guy's 6'8".
Oh, he's huge.
6'8".
Yeah,
and then you have Brian
very, very
Hoeing,
tall.
who's 6'6", coming out
Yes.
of the bullpen
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Hoeing's very tall. Reynolds is very tall. I'm trying to think who else is really, really tall.
There is one guy,
like really tall.
Well, Yu Darvish is 6'5", so he's not far off.
No,
of
Yu's
him.
big. Yep.
One guy who I don't know why I get these fascinations and I start really liking guys that never make it or never really get a chance to stick around. I loved watching Stephen Kolek pitch last year.
Yeah. Great guy,
he was
too.
fantastic. The ball just pops right out of his hand. It's just such a quick release.
He had moments.
Yeah, he had, when he first came up, he had moments.
Yeah.
He had great moments when he first came up.
Credit to Stephen Kolek as a Rule 5 guy that stuck around and did a nice enough job at times to remain on the major league roster. So, look, and Stephen's a good guy and could certainly be a part of this bullpen. All right, let's take one final break. When we come back, we'll do sort of a Major League Baseball roundup of headlines here. We've got some interesting comments from Yankees owner Hal Steinbrenner to talk about. We'll talk about a trade the Reds and Giants made earlier today. We'll talk about what else is on my list here. A number of different things. The Astros trading Ryan Presley. Some of the things that have happened in the last week or so that we haven't got to so far. So we'll focus on Major League Baseball at large when we return. Final segment coming up of Inside San Diego Baseball on a Wednesday night here on San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. 8:38 here on 97.3 The Fan. Final segment of the evening here on Inside San Diego Baseball. Sam Levitt with you. We've got Frank Marchese inside our San Diego studios doing the producing and chiming in from time to time here tonight. We are 2 weeks away from the official start of Padres spring training in Peoria, Arizona. I think we've done a nice job so far tonight, zeroing in on a couple of, a few different Padres-related topics. We started very broadly with all the different paths the Padres could go down in the next couple of weeks into spring training. What may happen, what may not happen, all these different sort of hypothetical scenarios and ways of thinking about where the Padres are right now. And we've got very specific with the Ralph Marinaccio trade, getting into that, relating it back to, Ron Marinaccio trade. I'll get that right by spring training. Ron Marinaccio trade, talking about Adrian Morejon and the idea that maybe the Padres could transition somebody like a Morejon or somebody else to the starting rotation with some of the needs the Padres have in their starting rotation. In this segment, to wrap things up, we'll get into a number of baseball-related topics, talk a little bit more Padres as well. Quick update from the Long Island, New York Levitt household. We've got some updates here because I'm on the East Coast tonight. Final little vacation time off for me before spring training. We've got my mom here in the living room, live studio audience. We've got my brother here too. It's a very rare occasion actually where my brother lives in LA. We're ironically both on the West Coast, even though we grew up here. My brother's here, too, so he's around. He was just throwing a football around to me here in the living room, like kind of, kid vibes, old school vibes here. Got my mom eating ice cream here at 11:40 p.m., but that's okay. I like a late-night ice cream as well. So my mom's eating ice cream, and I will also report that my brother and I, we just got a brand new ping pong setup in the basement, which we've had forever, but we needed a new net, new paddles, new ping pong balls. And I will report, very embarrassingly, that I have lost 4 straight games to my brother, and they have not even been close. I mean, I am just getting worked by my brother at ping pong in the basement. Terrible. Appropriate sound, Frank. Terrible. I mean, these are blowouts. I mean, I think the score was 21. I got down in the 2 games we played today. I got down 14-0, and I think it was 13-1. I mean, I consider myself a good ping pong player. If you listen to me enough, I'm very proud of my pickleball accomplishments. So you would think that would translate to just solid ping pong play. I am getting crushed in the Levitt House ping pong on this trip. So it's been a total embarrassment. Total embarrassment. So anyway, those are the updates from the Levitt household as we continue to talk Padres baseball. See, we're hour number 2. We're running out of things to talk about. So now we're talking ping pong. All right, get into some real stuff here. Let's get into some major league headlines that have come out the last couple of days and just in general. And if you know Frank and I, we would enjoy kind of ripping the Yankees. So that's what we're going to do right now. Let's get into the Yankees, okay? Final segment here. Frank and I, we will not take it easy on the New York Yankees. So the big controversy around the Yankees in the last couple of days here, Hal Steinbrenner, Yankees owner, saying in an interview in the last couple of days, quote, "It's difficult for most of us owners to be able to do the kind of things they're doing." He's referring to the Dodgers. I want to get the full quotes here too. Hold on. Let me pull up the right article here because I want to put this in context. And I'm turning on ESPN. I see Stephen A. Smith, Jeff Passan, really getting into Hal Steinbrenner. Let me read this from ESPN.com. New York Yankees owner Hal Steinbrenner weighed in on the Los Angeles Dodgers off-season spending spree, saying it will be even more difficult to keep up with the reigning World Series champions. A little bit later in the article, quote, "It's difficult for most of us owners to be able to do the kind of things they're doing. We'll see if it pays off. Steinbrenner said a little bit later in this interview, they still have to have a season that's relatively injury-free for it to work out for them. It's a long season, as you know, and once you get to the postseason, anything can happen. We've seen that time and time again. We'll see who's there at the end. But the part that I think really bothered Yankees fans and baseball fans in general was the line where he says, quote, "It's difficult for most of us owners to be able to do the kind of things that they're doing." Frank, it's the New York Yankees. At one time, they were the Dodgers of today. It was never a question of spending money under George Steinbrenner. It was never a question of whether they could go get the big fish. And I don't know, little weird, little different to hear Hal Steinbrenner talk like that. This is the New York Yankees after all, right?
Do you have, please tell me you have the quote where he was talking about Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger? Please. It's the greatest quote ever.
Yeah, well, I heard the Soto quote that kind of got into that. Look, the Yankees did sign Max Fried. Okay, I like the move for Bellinger. I actually like the Goldschmidt move as well. I think it's hard to really love their offseason when the big fish was Juan Soto and they came up empty and they lost him to the Mets of all teams. It's different to hear a Yankees owner talking like this. And then you had Jeff Passan, you had Stephen A. Smith, I saw on ESPN, but Passan, I want to get to what he said about it because he went on, I think it was the Michael Kay show in New York, and he was really tough on Hal Steinbrenner. Jeff Passan said this, okay, about the Yankees' lack of spending this offseason. And again, lack of spending. They did sign Fried to a big contract, but aside from that, they've not done a ton. The quote here from Jeff Passan: "If the luxury tax penalties are so tough, then why are the Dodgers and Mets doing it? The Mets have been the past 2 years, and they've shown a willingness to go there. At the end of the day, these are New York Yankees. If a luxury tax threshold is impeding them, that says more about where they are than it does the luxury tax itself. When have the Yankees ever played third fiddle in baseball? That's where they're right now when it comes to spending." So, I think the point is, Frank, it's not the Yankees of yesteryear. It really isn't. There was a time where they were essentially the Dodgers of today, where no number was too big, no guy was overpriced, and they could kind of run the game the way they wanted. That has changed, and I think part of that is on the Yankees ownership.
It's known poverty-stricken franchise, New York Yankees. It's as far as the Met thing goes, I don't think the Mets aren't over the $300 million cap, are they? Last I saw, they weren't.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I'm not even sure without looking.
I think it was $292. Now, if they do end up signing Pete Alonso, they will be. But they were able to get Soto and stay under that luxury tax because they had Scherzer off, they had Verlander come off, they had a bunch of big contracts come off the books. The Yankees, of all teams, the Yankees are crying about money.
Right. That's the part that's ridiculous. Yes.
This is a team that bought so many World Series championships, just the same way the Dodgers are trying to do now. And now they're crying poor. Stop. Please. You are the New York Yankees. 27 rings. The winningest franchise in all of sports. No one is going to feel bad for you at all, which, by the way, brings me right on back because I've read this quote 20,000 times and it makes me laugh harder and harder every time. I think Bellinger and Goldschmidt are going to make up a good deal of Juan Soto's offense.
Yeah.
Hal Steinbrenner said that. Those are words that came out of his mouth.
Well, look, the funny part about that is Bellinger can be a really, really good player. He's not Juan Soto, but he's a former MVP. Certainly can put up some big numbers, you would assume, in that stadium. So it's not the idea that Bellinger couldn't have a really great year. He may, or Goldschmidt couldn't have a big-time bounce-back year. He may. But to make the insinuation that that's going to make up for losing a player the caliber of Juan Soto is the part that, makes your head hurt if you're a Yankees fan. All right, anyway, enough about the Yankees. Couple of other headlines here. Reds earlier today trading for Taylor Rogers, former Padre from the San Francisco Giants. Rogers had been a Giant the last couple of years. Giants getting minor league reliever Braxton Roxby, like that name, Braxton Roxby. And Taylor Rogers, 34 years old, could be a closer for the Reds. Obviously was a closer for the Padres first half of 2022. He was really good last year. It's an interesting move. 2.40 ERA, 60 innings last year. Taylor Rogers struck out 64. Obviously, the Giants made a big signing with Willy Adames. I would assume with Buster Posey at the helm now that they want to be competitive. I haven't looked into it a ton. Little odd to me that they would trade one of their key relievers from a year ago in Taylor Rogers. So I got to look into it a little bit more. I saw that headline just before I came on the air, but just an interesting move there between the Giants and the Reds. Couple of other just articles that I saw in the last couple of days, and we talked about this a little bit, I think a couple of weeks ago, Frank. This was from David Schoenfield on ESPN.com earlier today. And one name, and it was an article from David Schoenfield where he went through the remaining free agents and essentially listed their best fits as the best fits as far as player to team. And one guy that, again, was linked to the Padres, not linked to the Padres, but at least, he made the point that the Padres would be a nice fit for this player. It was a name that I brought up a handful of weeks ago, and it was Jose Iglesias, who had a really nice year for the Mets last year. I don't think people even realize. I know, they knew the OMG stuff, but I don't think they even realize how good he was in still limited playing time for the Mets last year. He hit .337. He had a 3.1 WAR in 85 games. It could be a fluke what he did last year, but he also, puts bat on ball, plays really good defense, is a very versatile defender as far as where he could play. When you talk about a player that could certainly play second base, fill in at other spots, allow Luis Ariz to be DH most days, you move Cronenworth back to first base most days, a guy who's not going to cost a lot of money. I said this a few weeks ago. I think Jose Iglesias would make a lot of sense on a very cheap deal for the Padres. He's somebody, again, I don't know that you're going to get the season he had a year ago. In all likelihood, you won't. But he is a player that not a ton of people have talked about that I think would make a lot of sense at the right price for the Padres. Somebody that could really fit a nice role and essentially complete your infield and also allow Ariz to mostly be a DH. Iglesias intrigues me. I said it a couple of weeks ago. I'll say it again.
If you want a replacement for Ha-Seong Kim, that's your replacement for Ha-Seong Kim. 100%. That's the guy. That's not even a question. In order to fill out the roster, Iglesias should 100% be on the Padre radar.
Yeah, I again, that was David Schoenfield writing it, just, listing the Padres as a quote-unquote best fit for Iglesias, but it was interesting because I know we brought him up a couple of weeks ago, and I just think he would make a lot of sense and somebody that's not going to cost a lot of money. So I'm continuing, and by the way, he's also somebody that the Padres have signed to a minor league deal before. That was well before he was a New York Met last year and had that whole role with that team last year. So he is somebody that has had a relationship with the Padres before. So interesting there. Speaking of another former Met, in this David Schoenfield article, another name that would be interesting for the Padres. They still need a left fielder, presumably. Somebody like a Harrison Bader is interesting. Again, I'll say this term again, he's not going to knock your socks off as far as a name and as far as potential production, but he is a professional outfielder who plays good defense, has a little bit of pop. It's another name, Frank, that, and I think we've mentioned him before, that, hey, when you're looking for players that are affordable, that could at least give you another option, hey, a guy like a Harrison Bader, not a crazy idea as well. So Iglesias and Bader, those are two names I think to keep a little bit of an eye on. One other thing to just wrap up here. Kylie McDaniel, very, very good writer for ESPN, does a ton of great work as far as prospect rankings, came out with his top 100 prospects in baseball. And unsurprisingly, Leo Dallas DeVries ranked as the 15th best prospect in baseball. Ethan Salas dropping down a little bit, and this has been pretty consistent in all the rankings. Now, he's not dropping down a ton in these rankings, but had a pretty tough year, especially offensively, at High A last year. He was ranked 22nd. But look, bottom line is Padres still have these two very, very, very young prospects. I mean, DeVries is 17 in a lot of still the very high end rankings, and we'll see. I mean, look, that's certainly a storyline with DeVries and Salas. I don't think, in my opinion, either of these guys, and Salas would be the one to really think about. I don't think either of these guys, especially Salas, as far as being more ready for it, potentially. I'd be shocked if Salas is here at any point in 2025. Quite frankly, I don't think he should be. You got to take your time. He's 18 years old, and he really struggled offensively at High A. But it will be, I think, throughout the year, a storyline to watch how Ethan Salas does. You know, as he gets older, as he has another full season in the minor leagues. Leo Dallas DeVries, he'll play his first full minor league season. Again, am I going to put a ton of stock into what a 17 and 18-year-old are doing? Probably not. I'm not going to go crazy if any of those guys, either of those guys, has a tough year. But again, just something to keep in mind as we get towards spring training, get towards opening day. I think a lot of us will be paying pretty close attention to how those two top prospects do, and I think in particular based on last year, how Ethan Salas does as well. That's a look at some of the headlines, some of the articles that have popped up in the last couple of days, and that will just about do it for us here tonight on Inside San Diego Baseball. We will be back with you next Wednesday, a week from tonight, with one more pre-spring training show of Inside San Diego Baseball, and then after that, it is off to Peoria. Have fun at FanFest. Again, 97.3 The Fan will be live behind Section 113, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at FanFest. Ben and Woods back with you 6 a.m. tomorrow. You're listening to San Diego's #1 sports station, 97.3 The Fan. Good night, everybody.